Well, there we go. Greetings, everyone. My name is Tim Keyes, and I am the host of God Save the King. And you are listening to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told radio network. And this handsome gentleman over here is my good friend and guest, Michael Parker.
Hi, Tim. Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, good to see you. We haven't seen each other here in a minute, but we've known each other for what, about 10 years now?
I think it's at least that. I think it's more, actually. I think it's closer to probably, well, maybe it's 10 or 15 at least.
Yeah, it's 10 to 15 years. And we had the privilege of making a television show together a few years ago. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But we're great friends. And Mike is an investigative journalist. Okay, so he has a wealth of knowledge on controversial subjects. And that's what this is. This is a controversial subject. So he makes a great counterpoint to ask me the probing questions and things like that. So I'm really excited to have him on today. He won't necessarily be a part of every show, but I'm going to have him on as often as I can get him on here, just because it's so much fun to have him on. So
well, that'll be my pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's fabulous. I'm really, really excited to have you here. So, I guess. Oh, before we go too far, let's take care of a little bit of business. This is social media, and we got to take care of a few things here. The first thing I need to point out is the fact that the views of God Save the King, both myself as the host and the guests I have on here, are not necessarily the views of the Truth Be Told radio network. And then also, you can listen to Truth Be Told radio network worldwide on a variety of different platforms. Obviously, you can log into their website and click the big listen button that they have on there. And then also, you can listen on Alexa devices, Google Play devices, and, your Apple iPhone with the HomePod smart speakers. So there's many, many different ways of listening to Truth Be Told radio network. So that's something we wanted to just mention real quick here. So, Michael.
Yes.
Let's jump into this. Let's start talking about some stuff.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say congratulations on the new show. It is a long time coming. You have important information. You have a great message, and I'm just glad to see you have this new platform to do your show and get all this information out. And I'm glad to be of service.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should mention that this is the premiere. If you're watching now or listening now, this is the first episode of God Save the King on. Let's see if I can rattle off the letters here. TBTRN, Truth Be Told Radio Network. This is the first episode. This is the premiere. So we're going to spend some time really getting into the background of what God Save the King is and really what's brought me this far, because this is, like I said, a relatively controversial subject that it's going to take some people by surprise. Other people, not so much. Other people are going to go, oh, okay, well, that doesn't really surprise me much at all. Tell me more. And then other people are going to be like, oh my God, you got to be joking. I've never even remotely heard that before. So, here we go. Let's have some fun.
Well, Tim, first of all, I think you're right. I was unaware of this information until I met you. And I was one of those people that when you told me, it didn't surprise me, but it still surprised me somewhat. So I think before we get into the information itself, I think you should tell the audience who you are and what you've done to bring this information about, so they know even more about you.
Yeah. See, folks, that's why you have a host. That's why you have a guest. Is they keep you on point and ask these great questions, because he's absolutely right. So, my name is Tim Keyes. I have been, I guess you would call it an amateur theologian, even though I do have some graduate degrees, an amateur theologian and an amateur historian for about the past 30 to 35 years. And I've researched a wide variety of subjects, but this one, God Save the King, and we're going to give you the punchline here in just a second, has been my passion for about 30 years. So what God Save the King, and so let me tell you what God Save the King is, and then I'll go back to the background a little bit. What God Save the King is God Save the King is telling the nativity story. In its simplicity, that's what God Save the King is telling the nativity story, but there's a huge catch. And the huge catch is the fact that Jesus was not born on December 25th. And when we correct that one misconception, what happens is then it reveals another misconception. And that reveals another misconception. And then when you correct that one, it reveals another misconception. And what winds up happening is you get this domino effect of these misconceptions toppling over one at a time. Pardon me. And the end result is you have a story that actually looks much different than the traditional nativity story, which is what we are used to. It's the way we think, what we've been fed the traditional nativity story for, our entire lives, for one thing, and even going back further than that. But ironically, it's the traditional story is, in some ways, I should say, in some ways, it's not as old as everybody thinks it is. But so now I get to rephrase. God Save the King is telling the nativity story, but it's retelling the nativity story as it really would have happened biblically and historically. So that's really the key to what God Save the King is.
Well, when you say biblically, there is the story that we all know, and your story is not like that, I guess, is what you're implying. So
Correct.
if there is a difference, give me some examples of these differences so we can move forward.
Okay. Well, let me give you a couple of quick differences, and then I do want to just give you a little bit of the history of the project as
Yes,
well, because
please.
that'll help people out here. So, on one hand, certain broad strokes remain the same. Okay. Mary and Joseph definitely traveled to Bethlehem. No question there. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. The Magi came to, there were angels on the night he was born. The angels visited the shepherds prior to that and said, hey, born unto you this day in the city of David is Christ the King, right? That definitely happened. The shepherds then went and visited or found the baby in a manger wrapped in swaddling clothes, which that's really provocative, because we'll talk about it at some point, might not even be today, it might be later, but swaddling clothes were only on a newborn for a matter of minutes. So the fact that that was the sign that was given to them is pretty striking, because that means the timing of them finding a newborn babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And we're definitely going to talk about the manger. Again, probably not today, but we're definitely going to talk in depth about the manger. But so that definitely happened. The Magi definitely visited, no question there. Now the Magi were not there on the same night as the shepherds. So there's one distinction right away that we can pay attention to, is the fact that the shepherds found a baby in a manger, but the Magi found a young child in a house. Okay, now, so right there, it seems it might be a minor distinction, but it actually winds up being a major distinction once you dig into it and realize what's going on.
That's a huge distinction, because if you're saying the Magi found a toddler in a home, that is completely different than the story of the three wise men appearing on the evening of his birth that we
Of
see
course.
in traditional imagery. So that's
Correct.
a huge change. And I guess if this is one of the examples of the difference in your version of, not your version, but what your research is uncovering, how do we share this information to some people that's going to be shocking? And, to some people, it might even be disturbing, because they are only familiar with the traditional representation of the nativity story.
Right. Well, you share it very slowly and patiently, and I'm going to reach over here and grab my notes now. So everybody knows this. I can almost guarantee you throughout my show here, and I don't presume to speak for Michael, but I'm going to speak for Michael for a second here, which is that this is some pretty dense information. So there's going to be times when I'm just going to have to reach over to my notes and read from the notes to get the idea across accurately, because we want to because just like Michael said here, this can be pretty shocking information to people. There might even be people listening right now that are going, what? What do you mean he wasn't born on December 25th? What do you mean the story is different? We've been following the traditional story our entire life, and you're telling me it's wrong, and to be blunt, yes, but remember, this is not that much different than any documentary about any historical figure, right? So if you go on the History Channel or A&E or whatever it is, and you punch up a documentary, and we're watching a documentary about, Wyatt Earp or William Wallace, or for that matter, Ragnar Lothbrok, or any of these guys, it's pretty much a guarantee that the host or one of the experts, right, very early in the story is going to say, hey, the tradition goes like this, but the reality is probably more like this. And so that's really no different, with God Save the King and the story of the Nativity. The tradition took hold and just kind of ran away with itself, for frankly hundreds of years. And it just isn't, unfortunately, it just didn't really look like that. But we've just been so programmed to believe that story that, we tend to not think twice. And then when someone like me comes along and says, yeah, by the way, I thought a little harder about that, and it doesn't really look like that, that kind of throws a monkey wrench in the works. So, but let me read this real quick, because this is my paraphrase of a quote I read many years ago. Geez, probably 30 years ago. I was reading a book on a very controversial subject, and the man who wrote the book, he realized that same thing, that he was writing on, well, here, let me just kind of explain it. I won't even read the quote, but is that he realized he was writing on a very controversial subject. So then what he did in the preface to the book is he said something basically like this. He said, look, I've had 30 years, and that's true for me. I first discovered, we're going to get back into the history of how I discovered this in a minute. I first was introduced to the idea that Jesus was not born on December 25th back in the mid 1980s. Okay. So this has been, my God, I mean, do the math. What is that? 35, 36 years that I've been researching this subject. So that means that I have had 35 years to slowly and incrementally change my mind about these things, right? Now, that doesn't mean that certain things didn't change my mind very quickly. There's certain information that has only come, and something else I should mention real quick before I finish that quote is the fact that this is an ongoing project. So that means I reserve the right to change my mind again, right? That as new information comes up, it may challenge what we already know, right? I mean, Michael, you and I, we recorded a TV show, 4 years ago?
Yes.
And on this subject, and I've got new information now that, frankly, you and I've got to record a new TV show now because, it's different, So at any rate, like I was saying about this quote I read in this preface from this man who wrote on a controversial subject, he says, look, I've had 30 years to slowly and incrementally change my mind. But you, the viewer who is here watching me on YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is, or someone who's reading, my articles on my website or whatever the case may be, you are running into this in, frankly, a moment of time by comparison. In a few minutes' time, I am going, oh, yeah, by the way, Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. He wasn't born in a stable. The shepherds and the wise men weren't there, which, you and I had at the same time, that is, right? And, you and I had that joke. I mean, you placed it so well in the TV show that, when you're setting up your manger scene, it's more symmetrical when you put
Absolutely.
the shepherds on one side and the magi on the other,
Yeah.
But the problem is they both weren't there on the same night. The magi arrived 15 months later. And things like that. So anyway, once again, back to this quote, is he said, so therefore, what I'm asking my listeners and asking my readers is, indulge me for a minute, listen to what I have to say. You're not required to believe me. That's, you can call me a nutcase or a heretic if you want. You're not required to believe it. But that's why I have the radio show. That's why I have the articles. That's why I have the website, is that, this is an opportunity, for us to, see if we can't, dig kind of deeply into this, and take a minute, take some time to really dig. So I do ask the patient indulgence, of our listeners that we're going to handle some relatively controversial stuff. But I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you about the evidence I found, how I found it, where I found it, and why I think it changes the story. So that's gonna become part of what we're doing here.
I just unmuted my mic. My dog was barking. Tim,
Yeah.
okay, so a date, while shocking to some, okay, all right. So let's say Jesus was not born on December 25th. I think to some people that's going to bother them more or less than others. But I guess the question would be if it's just a date, what's the issue? I mean, so let's start with that. If it's just a change of date, what is the date? And
Right.
B, why is that such an issue to address?
Very good. Well, when we did the television show, we kind of used the true date, as kind of a cliffhanger. Okay.
Yes.
Now, in this show, there's no reason to do that. Okay. Now, let me start by saying there are a wide variety of theories on precisely when Jesus was born. I have settled on one that I believe is accurate. It doesn't necessarily absolutely prove that it's beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the one and there isn't the possibility that it's something else, because that just has to do with the nature of historical evidence. But I believe that the Bible, see, here's the key, and this just gets into the bigger answer of your question here, is that I believe that the Bible cryptically tells us the date. Okay. Now that I am going to save as a cliffhanger for another episode. Today we're not going to talk about how I believe the Bible cryptically reveals his birthday, because for one thing, it's coming up. So we'll talk about that in a future episode when we get closer to the exact date. But I do believe the Bible cryptically reveals his birth date, and that birth date would be on the Gregorian calendar. It would be September 11th, 3 BC. Okay. Now there's a little shock value there because, of course, you go, oh my God, September 11th. Are you, what is that, some giant coincidence? Which, no, I don't think that's a coincidence. And that's another story for another time, that I don't think that's a coincidence. But also remember, that's the Gregorian calendar. And I mean, to be blunt, I haven't even checked this year's calendar to find out what day it lands on, because what's critically important is not so much what day it falls on in the Gregorian calendar, the English calendar, is what day it falls on in the Jewish calendar. Mm-hmm. Because that, frankly, is a critical component in this whole thing, is that we would have gotten to this point later in this broadcast, but I'll mention it briefly now, that we need to return the nativity to its Jewish context. That is hyper critical. Okay. One of the challenges we have is that because we are so familiar with the traditional nativity story, that we tend to do this kind of weird type of reverse engineering, which is we look backwards through the viewfinder of the traditional story and then superimpose those ideas on the actual story itself when they're not there. And that's a challenge. So we need to flip it around, take all these preconceptions, set them aside, and then start talking about, so how do we kind of wipe the slate clean, so to speak, and start from the beginning, throw out our misconceptions, and then piece by piece, let's put the story together to find out what it actually would have looked like. And then, like I said, not a secret, I believe he was born September 11th, 3 BC on the Gregorian calendar, which would have been the first day of Tishri, which is Rosh Hashanah, or also called Yom Teruah, the Day of Trumpets, in the Hebrew calendar. And that's no coincidence either. And we will definitely talk about that more in depth, that when you start talking about what the Hebrews call a moed, which is, on one hand, it's their word for a festival or a feast. Okay, so it's the Feast of Trumpets, right? It's a moed. But a moed, when you look at the deeper understanding in Hebrew's interpretation, a moed is also a rehearsal. Okay, And so Rosh Hashanah was their civil new year, right? So that makes sense because as their civil new year, it was the day that they either crowned their kings, literally, or it was the day they reckoned, regnal years. Okay. So even if the king wasn't literally crowned on the first of Tishri, they would reckon his reign from beginning on Tishri, et cetera, et cetera. So that is very provocative that the Messiah, what you would say in Hebrew is the Mashiach Nagid, that the Mashiach Nagid, by the way, coincidentally, he was born on the day the Hebrews crowned their kings.
It's
So,
amazing.
isn't it? Yeah, isn't it stunning? I mean, it really is pretty stunning. So one of the things, that we're definitely going to do here is, like I said, I haven't even looked it up for this year. I'm behind behind a little bit here. Is I need to look at the calendar and find out what date Rosh Hashanah is this year, what date the Feast of Trumpet is, because we are in one of our future shows. We are most definitely going to look at the astronomy and the sign that I believe is cryptically given in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 about when he was born. And, we'll definitely talk about that more in depth.
Well, I would like to add something in here at this point. For those who this may be entirely new material to, what I've learned since discovering this via Tim is that there are other people who've looked into this material and have similar ideas. So this September 11th date, 3 BC, other people knew about this. I did not. And I guess what I would ask you, Tim, is there's your research,
right?
But there were other people who've done similar research. So you're not the only person to be putting forth these ideas.
Oh, not by a long shot.
Yeah, you may be expanding upon it to greater detail, but there are other people who have come to these same conclusions.
Right, sure. As a matter of fact, I'm going to poke my head off camera for 1 second.
Sure.
See if this book happens to be close by on my bookshelf. And if it is, great. If not, I'll just tell you about it anyway. But if it's right here, I can show it to the audience.
Go for it. We will wait patiently while Tim retrieves this book.
Okay, so this is not the original. Here we go. Let's get it on camera here. You got to raise it up. Okay, so this book is The Star That Astonished the World by Ernest L. Martin. Okay, and it's published by Ask Publications, and you can still get this book. Now, this isn't the original. The original that Mr. Martin wrote was called The Star That Astonished the World. And to get a copy of The Star That Astonished the World, that'll cost you a pretty penny because it's not in print anymore, and you're going to pay a lot of money to get an original of that book. But
Tim, hold that up again now that you're in the big frame.
There we go. That's a smarter idea. Yeah. The Star of Bethlehem, The Star That Astonished the World by Ernest L. Martin. Okay. So this was the book that introduced me to the concept 30 years ago. We're talking like 35 years ago. 1986, 87-ish was when I read this book for the first time, and it blew me away. Okay. And at the time, and even today, this is one of the best books on the subject. Okay. This is where you want to start. If you want to do your own research, start with this book because this is the one. Now, I'll also reach over here very quickly and grab another book real quick. Because this one, okay, this one's a little denser. Okay, this one's a little denser, but I'll just describe what this is. This was a symposium, okay, of scholars, all right, who met in, I think it was the Netherlands in, let's see if I can get a date here. A symposium of scholars who met in the Netherlands in like the early 2000s, okay? And they wrote this book, The Star of Bethlehem and the Magi, okay? Edited by Peter Bartel, but I think that's the Germanic pronunciation, Barthel. and then also George von Kooten. So they're either Dutch or German or something like that. They're the editors. This is published by Brill. Now, this is scholarly, and it's thick and it's dense. So I don't necessarily recommend that people start with this one, okay? Because it's dense, and also because this is funny. Because this is a scholarly work, they still entertain theories that I have long since dismissed. Okay. I was just out of curiosity. I popped up an article last night or the night before. Someone was talking about the Star of Bethlehem, and I read about 2 paragraphs and went, oh, okay, I ain't reading that one, because they were still focusing on a date that was just way too early. Okay. Just way too early. Right. There are some scholars that want to place his birth in like 12 BC. Another common year is 7 BC. And oh my God, those are just, and we know why, and we will discuss why. Okay. We're going to talk about why, but, yeah, those are just too early. Okay. Anyway. But yeah, those are just 2 of the books in my, extensive library that I have used to research this material. But that's how the journey got started was, as I'm like everybody else, someone said, well, hey, did you know that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th? And at that time I was like, oh, really? How do you know that? I mean, it didn't really shock me, but at the same time, it was like, well, okay, I'm listening. Tell me more. Tell me how you know that. Let me hear the evidence and decide for myself. Because if, frankly, if I don't like the evidence, I can always reject it. But if the evidence makes sense, it's like, I'm going to want to know. So that's really what started the journey, was reading that book. And I didn't start in-depth research immediately. It took a few years, which I'll tell you a little bit more about that story in just a second. Let's see, we got a comment here. I'm just curious. Comment? Oh, in the fall. Oh yeah. So someone commented in and said, in the fall this year. Not sure what he means by the question. I mean, so Rosh Hashanah, that is a fall feast. Okay. So that is gonna, Dwayne, that, the anniversary of his birthday does occur in the fall, in my opinion. So Michael, did you want to add something there?
I'm guessing that this might be a typo. Maybe they just meant in the fall of the year. And
Correct.
I had something I was going to ask you. I know what it is. Another one of the ideas that initially blew me away in your work, which just seems so fundamental and let's just say to non-believers or people who are just, their understanding of all this is limited. One of the things that you pointed out to me and to the audience of that show is that the word Christmas and a specific date, that's not in the Bible.
Correct.
December 25th, and the word Christmas does not exist in the Bible.
Yeah.
If you could expand upon that.
Oh, sure. That's a great place to talk, because that is a common misconception, because here we go. This is all about common misconceptions. Okay. So something that goes hand in hand with the misconception of that he was born on December 25th is that the Bible tells us that. And the simple fact of the matter is not even close. There is, number one, no explicit date is given. Now, I'm choosing my words very carefully here. Okay. No explicit date is given in the Bible when Jesus is born. It does not say December 27th, September 3rd, June 22nd. It doesn't say that. Okay. So that's not in there, period. So regardless of when he was born, we've got to put together the historical jigsaw puzzle, the biblical jigsaw puzzle, and figure it out. Right. Now, likewise, there's no implicit date. So that's another point, is that, well, isn't it implied that he was born on a certain date? And it's like, well, no, that's not in there either. There's no verses you can point to that imply a certain date. Okay. And then third, that brings us to, well, doesn't it imply that he was born in a certain season? And while the Bible flirts with that one, even that one is pretty, nebulous. It doesn't even really imply that he was born in a certain season, other than that he was born in warm weather. Okay, because that's the whole shepherds were watching their flocks by night in open field. Okay, so we can take a second and talk about that one. This one's actually no great mystery. Even skeptics, even people who try to maintain a December 25th birth date, will admit the facts that I'm about to state. Okay, which is that shepherds in the Levant would take their sheep and goats out into open field starting in the spring. Okay, mid-March to the beginning of April is when they would move their flocks into open field, and then they would live with their flocks in open field day and night, 24 hours a day, until the fall, when then they would bring them in out of open field and start keeping them in sheepfolds through the winter, because in the winter it got cold, and it did get cold enough to snow. You can have snow in Jerusalem or Bethlehem. It is possible. It is unusual, okay, but it is possible. But what you did have is you have rain, okay, and plenty of rain, okay. And sheep are about the dumbest animal on the face of the planet, and they tend to huddle together when it's raining, and they'll just do all kinds of stupid things, when they're huddled together like that. But what they would do is during the winter months, they would bring them into what was known as a sheepfold. And a sheepfold is either a natural or manufactured, or both, pen, frankly. Okay. A corral, a pen, right? So they would use
Enclosure of some sort.
yeah, they would use outcroppings of rock, or then they would gather up, tree branches or hedges or stuff like that, and they would make a place to stuff the sheep into this sheepfold. And then typically, here's a fun little detail to add, a theological detail, is that they would construct it in such a way that the entrance to the sheepfold would only be maybe 5 or 6 feet wide. And then when they would go to sleep, one of the shepherds would lay down across the opening. Okay. So, and that's part of what Jesus is referring to when he says, I am the door to the sheepfold. Okay. Wow. So it's using a metaphor that the people of that day and time would have absolutely understood. Okay. But back to the point being is that Scripture says that the shepherds were watching their flocks by night in open field. So that rather explicitly, it's not absolute, but it rather explicitly suggests that, okay, this was warm weather. This wasn't cold and rainy, because why would they say that if it was the exception? Now, people who want to maintain a December 25th birth date will say, well, no, this was an exception. Okay, well, then show me the exception. That's how I'm going to respond, to say, okay, then you've got to show me the exception. Okay, that's all there is to that. But yeah, that was like you said, that was something you learned, from me. So does that answer your question, or was there more to it?
No, it does. But it does. And I guess because my friendship with you and my work with you, I've always felt like my job is kind of to ask you the questions that normal people would ask. And I think, and so one of those questions I'm going to ask right now is that people might say, well, Tim, okay, so December 25th, not the date. Okay. But doesn't the existence of the man and his teachings, isn't that more important than a date? And if this date issue, or is this date issue an opening into a larger mystery that has to be resolved? I don't know if I'm phrasing that.
Yeah, I mean, I get the question, because So let's see if I can explain. Okay. So on one hand, the date really doesn't matter. Okay. On one hand, it doesn't. So like I said, we'll use the crude example I used a minute ago. So whether it's December 25th, September 11th, or June 22nd, technically from a certain perspective, that does not matter. Okay. But flip it over from another perspective, it matters greatly. Now, the precision may not be like uber important. Okay. Maybe. And here's what I mean. Because like there's another candidate birth date, okay, that is entirely possible. I don't think it's the one. I've actually had to choose between the two to which one I think is true. Okay. So another possible date is actually September 25th, 2011. 2 weeks later. Okay. And let me tell you why. Because
Wait, hold on.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You said September 23rd, and then 25th. You said 25th. Then right. You said 2011, which I think was just a misspeaking.
No, I'm sorry. Did I? Thank you.
But if it's September 23, it's still in the fall. I'm sorry, right. 25th. I'm stuck on this thing. It's still in the fall.
Yeah, correct. So, but this goes to the larger point here. So let's clarify. If I flubbed the words here, let's clarify. An alternate theory is that Jesus was not born on September 11th, 3 BC. The alternate theory is that he was born on September 25th, 3 BC. Okay. So I'm using this to illustrate the point that the absolute precise date isn't hypercritical for certain reasons. Okay. For certain reasons. But both of those two dates have way more merit than December 25th because they're based on biblical evidence, and especially not just biblical evidence, but frankly, Jewish evidence, right? Because this is something, and I mentioned this earlier, so let's talk about it for a second. Because of the traditional nativity story, right? And because the traditional nativity story is, frankly, incorrect, we do have this tendency to look backwards and to even read our Bibles through this viewfinder, this lens of the nativity story, and that therefore we superimpose these mind pictures. And I mean, I did it for years. I should have mentioned this earlier, that when I was introduced to the hypothesis that Jesus was not born on December 25th, that he was born on September 11th, 3 BC, 35 years ago, I was not the only person reading that book, okay? There was a bunch of us in my Bible college that were reading that book and going, oh my God, right? Now, one thing, but a mistake that I think a lot of us made, and it's semi-understandable, okay, is that we assumed that the date changed, but the story didn't. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it took me, this is what did take the 30 years of research, is that once I corrected that, it was like, oh my God. Well, he wasn't born. Okay. He wasn't born on a cold winter's night, right? The first Noel, the angels did say, right? The Christmas Carol, the Christmas Carol, the first Noel, I've documented, has like 24 errors in it that didn't happen, right? So he wasn't born in the fall. He wasn't born in cold weather, okay? He was born in warm weather. So, well, that takes away that. Now we're going to talk about the stable business in another episode, right? But hypothetically, even if he was born in a stable, okay, if it was warm weather, well, that changes the story. They weren't miserable right. If it was warm weather, right? I mean, sleeping outside, quote unquote, because a stable would be some shelter, but sleeping outside in the fall would actually be rather pleasant, and the only reason you demand the shelter is because you're talking about having a newborn baby.
Tim,
you want to add?
Yes. I think what you're saying is that by changing the date, or finding the correct date, what it really does is recontextualize the
Mhm.
entire story.
Yes, it
Um,
does.
I mean, it changes a lot of things, and perhaps some might view that as, well, still, okay, well, this is a scholarly type endeavor to determine that information, but it just changes so many things, because if it's, you've already mentioned that the Magi were not there on the evening. Oh, that's a big one that we've all
Yep.
thought happened. Now you're telling me that he was born in the fall in warm weather. I mean, this is just a couple of things that begin to create an entirely new picture of how
Yes.
it went down. And why is that important?
Well, that's important, frankly, because as you just mentioned, it not only does it change an entirely different picture, okay, which it does, it gives us an entirely different context. And that is huge, because let me talk about the September 25th theory for a second. Okay. Now I've looked into that one extensively, and and juggled them back and forth. And the reason the September 25th theory works is a lot of the same reasons the September 11th theory works. Okay. A lot of those reasons are the same. They're identical. They don't really change much. But the distinction between the two is that the September 11th theory bases itself off of the astronomical sign that is given in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Okay. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So the September 11 theory, is based on the notion that that is a specific sign that only occurs in the heavens, frankly, only for a matter of minutes. Okay. Because see, that sign, and like I said, we'll talk about this more in depth in a future episode. That sign occurred on the western horizon, visible from Jerusalem on September 11th, 3 BC, from about 6:30 p.m. to about 8 o'clock p.m. Okay. So that's a window of about 90 minutes. That's it. Okay. And that sign did not appear any other time for another 2,000 years. Okay. So if one believes, as I do, that that is the sign of his birth, because when you start reading verses 3, 4, 5 of Revelation 12, it says, I saw a great sign and wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she travailed in pain, about to be delivered. Okay, so the sign is of a pregnant woman about to give birth. Okay, and she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations. Okay, well, that is telling you that John was seeing this sign of the birth of the Messiah. That's what it's telling you. Okay. So now the distinction between a September 11 and a September 25th application of those verses is that the September 25th crowd, they acknowledge that sign. They're not ignorant of that sign. They just say, okay, he wasn't born exactly at that time. That was the sign of his impending birth. Whereas I'm saying, no, it's the sign of his birth. It happened at that time. Okay. But at the end of the day, and this all goes back to the question about, does the date matter? Right? From a certain perspective, it doesn't. Okay. But from a certain perspective, it absolutely does, because both of, and here we go. So the September 25th theory is based off of the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14. Okay. That it, which of course I'm blanking, but it says that Jesus made his dwelling among us. And in the Hebrew Bible, it is the word tabernacle. Okay, Jesus made his tabernacle among us. And in that year, September 25th would have been the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles.
Let me ask you.
Go ahead. A different Hebrew feast. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so by changing the date, if you change the date and it recontextualizes the event, then
Right.
that means that what we've been learning for millennia,
right,
is what you call Christian mythology. And
yes.
that's going to rub some people the wrong way.
Oh boy, yeah, I know. I mean, that is. Go ahead.
But on the other hand, to the non-believer, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, now you're telling me there's a myth within a myth.
Right. Yes. Because I get that, and that is, skeptics and non-believers, they believe that Christianity is a myth already. Okay.
Right.
Okay, fine. Well, maybe I can help persuade you a little that it's not quite what you think it is. Because, see, behind all this, because this gets more to the meat of the answer of your question, is that Judeo-Christianity is a historically based faith. Okay, it's based in history. Okay, if Jesus was not see, there's certain versions of Christianity, Gnostic Christianity, that try to say that either Jesus wasn't a real person at all,
Right.
or that he was just kind of this bizarre spirit that walked among us, or all kinds of wacko theories. Whereas traditional Judeo-Christianity, and not the Judeo so much, because to be blunt, the Jews deny that Jesus was their Messiah, but Christians believe he is. If he's not a real historical person, then yeah, we get into really wobbly ground really fast. Okay. If he wasn't an actual historical person. So that is why the date does matter. Okay. That is why the date matters, is because Christians believe that Jesus really did walk the earth, that he really did die and rise again from the dead, and that is the basis of our faith. That he's a real person, that he was. And see, and now because me studying the nativity, one of the themes of in the nativity story was how the angel visited Mary and said, you're going to bring forth a child and you're going to call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Okay. So these are the bookends of the greatest story ever told, right? The nativity and then the death and resurrection. Okay. So it's the same kind of thinking for both of them, that, if he wasn't a real historical figure, then I'm not about to say that disproves Christianity. I'm not going to say that, but it does mean we've got to really rethink things if he was not a straight up legitimate historical person. That's extremely important.
Well, for the people who do believe, you also have an interesting take on Christian mythology, and you have kind of not an analogy, but you point to a particular quote in some Tolkien work. But just talk about Christian mythology from the point of view of a Christian, the way you
Sure,
see
right.
it.
And yes, you pointed out a second ago, and I completely agree. That is a very explosive statement. There's a lot of people who are not going to like the fact that I chose that phraseology, but I did, and I did for a reason, because that's exactly what the traditional nativity story is. The traditional nativity story and can be demonstrated, and I will demonstrate as we go forward in this series, right? I will demonstrate that the traditional nativity story is almost exclusively from non-biblical sources. And I'll show you what they are, and I'll show it to you in print and say, this is the book they're from. This is when it was written. It's not biblical. It is full of biblical, historical, geographical, and astronomical errors, and it can't be trusted for even the most mundane fact, even the most benign fact in the source material for the traditional nativity story cannot be trusted. Just absolutely can't. So, but you mentioned that the comparison to Tolkien, and I borrowed this because there's that scene. Now I'm referring to the movie. Okay.
Yeah.
I read Tolkien when I was when I was a young man, right,
Yeah.
and loved it. And then when when Peter Jackson's treatment of it came out, I thought he did a magnificent job of turning that into a movie. And so, like I said, I'm basing this on the movie. I don't remember exactly which book the quote came from or exactly who said it, because he did switch some dialogue around, that certain people said certain things that didn't say certain things, or You know,
but what you're about to say still holds merit regardless.
exactly. That's the whole point. Is this
Yeah.
still holds merit? Yeah, because there's lines where Boromir said what Legolas said and stuff like that. But at any rate, this is from the introduction to the very first movie, and in the movie, Lady Galadriel is narrating over this history, right? And she makes a great statement. She says, "History became legend, legend became myth, and some things that should not have been forgotten were lost." And that is exactly the point. That is exactly the point, is that because we allowed, frankly, this we allowed a cute, and we're going to talk about the origins of the nativity story, right? We're going to talk about the origins of nativity scenes, of when they began, right? Especially the living nativity scenes where you use like real people and real animals and stuff like that. And they became enormously popular. And on one hand, I suppose as a teaching tool for for children or something like that, that's no big deal. But the problem is that the story became entrenched, right? Which means the errors became entrenched, right? And it became the adult historical version of the telephone game, where someone starts with a statement, and then every time you retell it, it gets a little bit different, a little bit different, a little bit different, a little bit different, and then by the time only 1,000 years passes, now it's entrenched in our collective social psyche, and we can't get it out that this is how it really happened. So yeah, you're correct. On one hand, people are not going to like the fact that I use that phrase Christian mythology, but that's what it is, because the traditional nativity story has way more errors than truth. That's the thing. There comes a place where the scales tip, and it's just not accurate anymore. It becomes untenable, right? That they're sit there.
Okay, we've got a whoops. We had a brief hang up on our, let's see, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you can still hear me or not. This is Michael. We've lost Tim. We had a bit of an issue. I guess what I was trying to explain or ask Tim about, and I hope that we're able to get him back online, is if what he's saying is true and this ground has been tread by others before, then why is there reticence to have more ministers, pastors, preachers, religious scholars talking about this? I have an opinion as to why that might be, but I don't know for sure the answer, or there probably are many answers. And I hope that Tim can explain that to us.
Okay,
Tim, are
am
you
I
back?
back? Can you hear me?
Yes, but
Okay.
we do not see you. We see
We've got a different avatar. That's a picture of Kevin Gallagher, the host of TBTRN. But at least you got my audio back.
that's right.
Yeah, unfortunately my computer / internet decided to like just really glitch out right there, and it's my camera that went. Obviously, my is that no? That's not what happened.
Well, Tim, can I reiterate a question to you that
Yeah, please.
while you were gone, I was explaining to the audience that one of the questions that I have that I wanted to place to you is if what you are saying is true, and you are treading ground that others have tread before you, then why? And I assume that I guess I know some of the answers, but
Right, sure.
why is this not being pursued and taught and researched by many other pastors, ministers, religious scholars of various walks? I mean,
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, anyway, why is that? And I like to say, as I ask this, I'm asking it with pretty good answers in mind, but I want to hear
Sure.
your answer.
Okay. Well, on one hand, it is simply because the traditional story is ingrained in our
Yeah,
popular psyche. It's just entrenched, right? And when you get something that entrenched, it can be very difficult to dislodge it, right? And a lot of people don't want to. I mean, I run into lots of people that they love Christmas.
I do.
And hey, look, I love Christmas too, but they love Christmas. And the minute I say one word that upsets that tradition, it's like I get 110% emotional reaction. It's not a rational reaction anymore. It's complete emotion. But there are scholars, it's pretty striking. When I discovered the thing I discovered about that, I don't believe he was born in a stable. Okay.
Right.
I believe that is a translational error in the Bible.
Yeah.
And and we'll talk about that more at some other time. Because that changes the look, right? All of a sudden, the manger scene isn't accurate, like, at all, because he wasn't born in a stable, right? So, but I'm not the only, I wasn't the one who discovered that, right? Oh, and well, this was discovered by other scholars. And as a matter of fact, I shared an article with you and some others just a couple of weeks ago. I don't have it in front of me, so I forget the guy's name precisely. But you remember I posted that article about that priest during the Spanish Inquisition who discovered exactly what I'm talking about. He was a professor of theology at a university, but it was in Spain. I believe it was at the University of Salamanca. And but he discovered what he believes was a translational error, and that Jesus was not born in a stable, that he was born in an ordinary Judean home. And here you go. I mean, this is a great example. Because he was contradicting the traditional nativity stories, his own students reported him to the Inquisition.
Ooh, yep.
Okay. So the Inquisition brought him up on trial.
Sounds like 2021.
Oh my God. So the Inquisition brings him up on trial, and now the funny thing is he gets to defend himself, right? So he defends himself in writing. And the irony is now his written defense of his position is a part of the official record of the Spanish Inquisition. So this is, 500 years ago that we have a written record that he wasn't born in a stable. He was born in an ordinary Judean home, which is just really stunning. And then, we got to wrap up here. We're starting to run out of time, but then years later, he was arrested by the Inquisition again for something unrelated. And they didn't execute him, but he died while under house arrest, as part of the Inquisition. So it does demonstrate how cranky people can get when you upset their traditions.
Yes.
So, and that's not my intention. My intention is to simply tell the story as we find it in the Bible, which, in my opinion, is actually a much more striking story than the traditional story. I mean, the traditional story has its own kind of attraction, but as we get deeper and deeper into this and talk about what the real story would have looked like, I think people are frankly going to get their minds blown that this is really what it looked like.
Well, and I would even put in there, to some people, if they listen closely to what you're going to convey over your many episodes to come, I think that they may find that this makes the story more plausible than before.
Yes, it's going to become more plausible and more rational and more reasonable, and still a massive epic story on top of that. Yeah. So, well, we've got to actually wrap it up there. We're starting to run out of time. And so, once again, a little bit of business, which is that, my name is Tim Keyes. I'm the host of God Save the King. This is my very, very good friend, Michael Parker, who is my guest today and who I'm hoping is going to be on the show frequently, maybe not 100% of the time, but an awful lot.
It'd be my pleasure.
Yeah. And you're listening on the Truth Be Told radio network, which is available worldwide on, Alexa devices, Google devices, iPhones, and things like that, in addition to being able to listen to God Save the King and many other great shows on the Truth Be Told radio network. So thank you all for listening today. And, here we go. This is the premiere show of God Save the King, and we're going to sign off. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.